Hey everyone, it's Fox from modelmaking.guru here, back with another little quick how-to video. This time I'm going to be showing you how to do a gunk wash. Now, traditionally, if you're making a Gunpla or any model, you'll see that on the model there are lots of panel lines and grooves and recessed areas, where the traditional way to do these, especially if you're not painting your Gunpla, is to use a Gundam Marker. Basically it's a pen, often with a very fine tip, or you can get thicker ones. And that just literally draws into the lines and grooves. You can fill them in, clean them up with a cotton bud, and then you get your panel lines all marked with a darker colour. Traditionally it's brown Gundam markers for red painted areas, grey for white areas, black for darker blue colours, things like that. I'm going to show you a slightly different method, which will fill the recesses and panel lines, and will also add a little bit of tinting to the rest of the model, just to give it a bit more of a used look. This is really if you're looking for an ever so slightly weathered or very weathered Gunpla. If you like a nice clean no weathering Gundam, this might not be the one for you. It will fill all the panel lines nicely, but it will slightly tint and discolour the rest of the panel, so you may get some shading effects, but you might like that. But we'll go through and show you anyway. Now you notice here I've got the shield for my Wing Gundam commission that I'm in the middle of at the moment. It's been fully painted. I have actually pre-shaded around the panel lines, so it's got some shading there already. But as an alternative to actually using Gundam markers, and because this is going to be weathered, slightly weathered, it's got some paint chipping on here already, I'm going to use a gunk wash. Now, I'm doing this video as well because I've had quite a few people ask me about gunk washes. Now, I did do a how to weather your Gundam video, which was mostly gunk washes anyway, but I'm doing this little one just as another little reminder. Gunk wash is where you cover the whole piece in oil paint and then you rub it off, and if you're lucky, all the paint stays in all the recesses and some areas as well. Now, to respond to quite a few questions I've had recently, no, you can't do this with acrylics or enamels or any other kind of paint. You have to use oil paints. All other kinds of paint just dry in minutes, so if you cover this in acrylic paints and then try to rub it off, by the time you got halfway through, half of it will be dry and you'll just be making a mess. So don't try it with acrylics, don't try it with enamels, don't try it with anything other than oil paints. And you can use whatever colours you like. You can use bog standard artist oil colours, anything like that, doesn't really matter. I'm going to be using, as you all know me well enough by now, MiG 502 Abteilung Starship Filth, which is a beautiful colour. It's a lovely browny, oily, bluey shade. I find it perfect for this just because it's just a good universal colour. You can use, as I say, regular artist oils you can get from your local hobby shop. Only thing to be aware of is that the 502 Abteilung paints are super fine and smooth and not particularly oily. Artist oils might have a little bit of a grain to them, but they'll also be really oily and wet. So if you're using standard artist oils, you might want to use a little piece of sort of porous card as a palette and just let it sit for a minute to kind of leach some of the oils out of the paint, just so it's not quite so wet. Really, it'll just mean it doesn't take quite as long to dry, but you don't have to do that. If they're really wet and soppy and they're really sort of oily paints, it might make it easier to rub off. So it's up to you. Now the most important thing is this has been gloss varnished. It was gloss varnished using my old standby Pledge multi-surface wax. As you know me well enough by now, it's also known as Clear or Future. It has a million different names and labels, but as long as it says Pledge multi-surface wax, Clear or Future on it, you should be fine. Did a couple of coats, put the decals on, did a couple more coats to seal the decals, and then we're going to go ahead with this. The reason I've done a gloss varnish is you can use a matte varnish, but a gloss varnish gives a smooth surface, and when you're rubbing this stuff off, if you've got a matte varnish, it may discolour the surface even more because it'll collect in all the little depressions in the matte surface. A matte surface is rougher than a gloss surface. Think of it like orange peel on a car. It's very tiny, you wouldn't actually see it, but it just means there's more little nooks and crannies for the paints to collect in, and it'll leave you with a more tinted surface, harder to rub off basically. This will make it easier. It'll still sit on the surface, but it'll make it easier. So what do we do for a gunk wash? You will need your oil paint, a brush obviously. I tend to keep my acrylic brushes and my oil brushes separate, but for this job you don't need the best brush in the world, just a an old brush that you've got. It doesn't have to be a good brush because it's going to get battered doing this anyway. You won't have to throw it away, but it's just, you don't go for a nice fine pointy brush, just a scruffy old weathering brush. You will need some thinners. I'm using standard artist low odour oil thinners. Because you're using oil paint, you must use thinners for oil paints. Again, you can get these from your hobby store. As with most things, or many things, I wouldn't recommend buying ones made specifically for model paints just because they're a bit more expensive. You can get one of these. I got this for a few quid from Hobbycraft. Low odour is important because otherwise it'll stink. You can use white spirits, but they stink and they may damage the plastic. You can use turpentine or terps type thinners. Again, they'll stink. They may possibly damage the plastic, and I don't know how they'll react with the gloss varnish I've put on. So I go for the low odour thinners. Just if it says terps or white spirit, maybe avoid that one and just go for one that just says low odour thinners. Usually means they don't stink and they're fairly gentle on the paint and thinners. Little mixing cup. The only reason you need the thinners, by the way, is to clean your brushes afterwards. So there you go. Or to clean off any mistakes. Something to mix your paint on. This is just an old spray tin lid. Because these aren't particularly oily, they're very fine and they're not super oily. I don't need to sit them on a piece of cardboard and let all the oils leach out. I can just go straight from the... I could go straight from the tube, but you should never really take paint from the tube because you risk contaminating with the colours. A bit of tissue. You also need some cotton buds. Woo! Or Q-tips. I love that. That's like some kind of sea creature. It's like some kind of anemone. Anyway, it's like that. I've also got a chisel edge brush that I use for dry brushing. This might just be if I've got like a streak or something and I want to straighten it up a little bit. Or take a little tiny area off in a crevice or something. But generally we're just going to use this brush. Oh, there's one other thing as well, which you won't be able to see, but this is an old t-shirt. You need a soft cloth. Could be anything. Could be an old t-shirt, could be an old towel. As long as it's soft, not particularly fluffy, just soft and not rough and crispy. I don't want to know what you do with your towels if they're rough and crispy. So, how do we do it? Dead easy. First of all, take your oil paint. Stick a splob on my little temporary palette. Oh, one other thing as well, if you can, wear gloves because this gets really messy. And because you're going to be covering it in oil paint and handling it, you don't want to get fingerprints everywhere. So, I'm going to struggle to keep this on shot, but let's do my best. Dead simple. How do I do it? Get my brush, get some oil paints, and this is where most people go, oh my god, what are you doing? You just go like this. You just literally slap it on, blap it with the oil paints. Now, my good friend Tony, whose YouTube channel is Helgen something something something, I can't remember the number, my apologies Tony, I'll post it here. He does gunk washes as well. I tipped him onto those. He adores them. But somehow he managed to get one brush full of oil paint to cover like the whole damn thing he's painting. I don't know how he does that. You see, I'm reloading the brush here quite often. I don't know how he does that. And I hate to admit it, Tony, but I think he does gunk washes a bit better than me. Or at least he seems to get better end results. I don't know. I taught him the technique and now he's better than me, and something's not right there. So go around the model. As you can see, I'm just working it into all the little crooks and nannies. Sometimes you have to, because it doesn't naturally want to go into all the little crevices. So you might have to just push it in a little bit and work it in. And this is quite a slow process. So I shall speed up with the speedy buttons. And again, you just want him to cover everything. Don't worry that you're covering stuff up. So I'll hit the fast forward button. And I'll stop waffling, and when we come back I'll show you how to take it off. Right, and there we have it. It's now been fully gunked. I've not done the inside, I'll do that later. As you can see, I'm struggling for somewhere to hold it, and this is why you need to wear gloves, because you're going to get yourself covered in paint if you don't. And you're going to transfer paint to other parts you don't want to cover it in, and fingerprints and all that. So, that's that bit done. It's now completely covered in the Starship filth. As you can see, the Starship filth looks like a nice sort of bluey, browny, dark grey. It's not black. You can use whatever colour you want. You could use different tones, ochres, blacks if you want to. Black's a bit harsh for most things, so I'd probably stay away from black. But this is a good, oily, engine oil colour. The two I tend to use a lot for this kind of process are the Starship Filth, 502 Abteilung Starship Filth, and also 502 Abteilung Engine Grease, which is a much more brown, ochre tint for engine oil. And sometimes you can combine them. So, what's the next step? The next step is ridiculously simple. All you do, get your piece of tissue. I've got my hand inside here. Get your piece of soft cloth, sorry, not tissue, and very gently rub the oil paint off. Now I'm not gonna work it into the I can't get my words out as usual. I'm not going to work it into the grooves. I'm going to go flat over the surface so I can try and leave a lot of the paint in the grooves. Let's give it a try. See what happens. Keeping my hand flat. Try not to get the glove taking a lot of the paint off, because I don't want that. Now at first you'll think, oh my god, it's just made everything look really dark and glumpy. But don't worry, because you're going to work on it. Just gently rub it off, hopefully without parts of it falling off. Where you've got like raised edges, or here where there's like an exhaust or an intake or whatever you want to call it at the back, if you do that way, this way, you'll leave paint in the recess. If you do it that way, you might take the paint out. So there's some tactics involved. Just gently rub. I'm using the flat of my thumb inside the t-shirt that you can't see, and you'll see how it leaves the paint in this little area here. That's kind of what I'm going for, and the more you rub, the more will come off. Now, as you can possibly see, or you'll see at the end, as I said before, it does tend to tint the paint on the flat surfaces. What I mean by this is, if it was a nice crisp white colour before, now it'll be a slightly grubby white colour. You can never really fully get rid of that. It does tint the panel. So if you want a nice clean Gundam, this may not be the way forward. Although, if you wanted to and you wanted to spend the time, you could just put oil paint into the panel lines and around the edges and then rub it off. You don't necessarily have to cover the whole model in oil paint. You could be tactical about it. But because I'm doing this Gundam as slightly weathered anyway, because I don't believe that anything should be factory fresh. You know, these things see battle and combat. So, I can't remember if this one was at the bottom of the sea in the anime. I think it was. But, you know, these things see action, so you want it to have some weathering. Factory fresh is boring. Fresh off the battlefield, much more interesting. And that's about it. There we go. So as you can see now, oops, a bit around here. There are some little bits, if you can't get to with your hand in the t-shirt, you can get a little nub and just rub over to get into some of the little corners. Hope you can see all this. So the intakes here on these flat white bits. And I don't know if you can see, but there's more oil paint on the inside of that little bit there than there is on the outside. And that's just a nice little fade effect to suggest, you know, an exhaust or a vent of some sort. One thing you can do as well, using the old cotton buds, there's an area you want to try and fade a little bit more, let's say on this little sticky up bit, you can just gently rub it off there as well. If you can't get the little blob of the t-shirt in, just gently rub it with a cotton bud, and that allows you to get right down to an edge. As you can see, it's not really coming off now. There's a certain point at which the paint is kind of ingrained into the surface, and if you start scrubbing too hard, you'll just get patchy bits and it'll look a bit rubbish. Where else can we do? You can run it over little recesses and panel lines just to make sure there's nothing on the edges. Without, again, do it parallel to the surface so you're not taking the paint out of the grooves. See, I can get the cotton bud in here. Give it a good rummage around. Do a bit on there, so I can take a bit more out without getting rid of it completely. If you do it like this, that angle, you'll just take it out of the grooves. So always do it parallel to the surface. You can just run it there like that, just to get a bit more of this out. But you see there how it's gathered. I can run it on this edge here just to kind of smooth it. And that is pretty much that. Now the good thing with oil paints, like I said, they will take an age to dry. With a gunk wash, typically with a gunk wash, you want to leave this about 5 days to dry fully before you do anything with it, either varnishing over it or anything like that. Once it's done and it's dried, you want to varnish over that so it's protected from anything else you might need to do. You might have more weathering to do, or this might be the last stage, but you want to leave it for at least 5 days, varnish it. Depending on what you want to do, it might be your final matte coat. If you're doing a glossy model, it might be your final gloss coat. Or if you're going to be doing more weathering and painting, it depends what you want to do. If you're going to be doing some dry brushing over the top, you can. What I tend to do is, this looks kind of harsh at the moment and a bit rough and ready. But what I will do to blend it in even more is I will then, once this is dried and been protected, I'll go and dry brush over the red and the white with various colours. So I'll go over the white with a dry brush of white, and all that will do is just blend the flats of the panels in a little bit and make them a little less grubby. If they've gone a bit too dark, it's not a problem. It'll pick out the edges and it'll make that dark panel line stand out even more. So this area might become more of a white than a dirty white. But again, it's, you know, suits to your taste, whatever you want to do. You could just leave it like this. If it's supposed to be a super gunky vehicle, you could just leave it like this. It looks absolutely fantastic. But you can see now it's got all the panel lines are nice and dark. I say black would probably be too harsh, so don't use black unless you particularly want that effect. Give it about 5 days to dry. If you do anything wrong, this is where the thinner comes in. If you do anything wrong or you don't like it, all you need to do is you can easily rub this off with thinners. If you wanted to get that panel spick and span white, or almost spick and span white, you could dip your cotton bud in some thinners and just rub away. Because it takes so long to dry, it's easy to remove. Probably still leave a very slight tint, but bear in mind, of course, you probably take the paint out of the panel line as well. But say, for example, you're not sure about a colour, what you might do is put some paint on a panel line just around it, rub it off and think, yeah, this is the wrong colour, it's not really right. So you get your cotton bud and your thinners or a brush, and you just work it in and rub it off, and it will go completely. So if you want to test a colour, if you're not sure, you can use the thinners to get rid of it. And before you completely coat a piece in a colour, just do a little test. But that's gunk washing, and that hopefully should mean that by the end of it you've got a nice gunk washed model. I'm going to do this, I'm doing this over the whole thing, the whole model. So I've got all my little sub-assemblies off to the side here. So I'm going to go off and do that side. But that's gunk washing. Always use oil paints, don't use acrylics, don't use anything else. Make sure the oil paint is unthinned, don't thin it, just straight from the tube, stick it straight on the model. If you thin it, it's not going to work. You may not be familiar with the phrase gunk wash, because I completely made that up. However, I do know it's also called other things. Some people call it felting. I think it's called felting in the ornamental brass world, where you get like a brass ornament and they'll do this to make it look a bit more antique. It is an old technique that's been used by model makers, especially in movies, for many, many years, to just give a quick and dirty weathering coat to a model. In the old days of, well, in the days of, and still in the days of, when you're making a model for a movie, you don't spend months and months building something. You need to get it built and made as cheaply and quickly as possible. So they'll use this technique with various colours just to get this effect, and it's a really good effect. Like most things, it comes from the days of movies, which is brilliant. But that's gunk washing, that's all there is to it. Go ahead and have fun. Try it out on an old scrappy kit first. Don't go straight in with your most expensive perfect grade. And just have fun with it. But that's going to do. I'm not sure what the next how-to will be. I'll figure that out as I'm doing something. But for now, thank you very much for watching. If you've got any questions, find them into the comments on the YouTube or on the Facebook or Twitter. Subscribe to all the things, and go and make some cool models. And until next time, Adios amoebas!